Nobody remembers Franz Xaver Schwarz, and that's exactly how he wanted it. While Hitler was giving speeches, while Himmler was building the SS into a state within a state, while Goebbels was screaming propaganda into microphones across Germany, Schwarz was sitting in an office in Munich doing something that none of them could do without him. He was counting the money, managing the accounts, making sure that every rally, every newspaper, every brown shirt, every bullet, every train to every death camp was paid for. He was the treasurer of the Nazi Party for 20 years, from a struggling fringe movement in a Munich beer hall all the way to the most destructive regime in human history. Every single mark that passed through the Nazi Party passed through Franz Xaver Schwarz first. And without him, without the financial machine he built and ran with absolute precision, none of it happens. Hitler stays a failed painter. The Holocaust never occurs. The war never starts. The most dangerous man in the Third Reich never fired a single shot. Franz Xaver Schwarz was born on November 27, 1875, in Günzburg, Bavaria. Working-class background, nothing remarkable, nothing that would suggest the role he would eventually play in history. He trained as a clerk and worked his way into municipal administration in Munich, eventually becoming a city official handling financial matters. He was good with numbers, methodical, precise, reliable, the kind of man who finds genuine satisfaction in balanced books and orderly accounts. In another life, in a normal country, in normal times, he would have lived out a perfectly respectable career as a municipal finance official, retired comfortably, and been forgotten within a generation. But it wasn't a normal country, and the times were anything but normal. Germany in the early 1920s was a country coming apart at the seams. The First World War had ended in humiliation. The Versailles Treaty had stripped Germany of territory, military capacity, and national pride. Hyperinflation was destroying the economy. At its peak in 1923, a single loaf of bread cost billions of marks. People were burning currency for heat because it was cheaper than buying wood. The middle class, the people who had saved their entire lives, watched their savings become worthless paper in a matter of months. Into this chaos came radical movements offering simple explanations for complicated disasters. The communists blamed capitalism. The nationalists blamed the Jews and the Versailles Treaty. And in Munich, a failed Austrian painter with a gift for rhetoric was building a movement that blamed essentially everyone and promised to restore German greatness through will, violence, and racial purity. Schwarz joined the Nazi Party in 1922. He was 46 years old. Not a young hothead swept up in revolutionary excitement. A middle-aged municipal clerk who made a deliberate choice to attach himself to this particular movement. Why? The historical record doesn't give us a clear window into his personal motivations. What we know is that he joined. He brought his skills with him, and the party immediately recognized what they had. In 1925, Adolf Hitler appointed Franz Xaver Schwarz as Reichsschatzmeister, Reich Treasurer of the Nazi Party. He would hold that position for the next 20 years until the very end of the war. No other senior Nazi official held their position for that long without interruption. Not Himmler, not Goebbels, not Göring. Schwarz outlasted all of them in his role, through purges and power struggles, and the endless internal warfare that characterized the Nazi hierarchy, because nobody wanted to touch the man who controlled the money. When Schwarz took over the party finances in 1925, the Nazi Party was broke. Not struggling, actually broke. The beer hall putsch of 1923 had been a disaster. Hitler had spent time in prison. The party had been briefly banned. What remained was a disorganized collection of true believers with no money, no infrastructure, and no clear path to relevance. Schwarz changed that. Methodically, systematically, without drama or fanfare, he built a financial organization from nothing. He created a dues structure that actually worked. Members paid, and the money was collected and accounted for properly. He established financial controls that prevented the kind of casual theft and mismanagement that plagued most political organizations of the era. He tracked every pfennig with the obsessive precision of a man who genuinely loved accounting. And as the party grew, the financial machine grew with it. By the late 1920s, the Nazi Party was receiving significant donations from German industrialists and businessmen who saw the movement as a bulwark against communism and a potential route to political influence. Schwarz managed these relationships, ensured the money flowed properly, and kept the books in a way that gave major donors confidence that their contributions were being used effectively. This matters more than it might sound. Political movements throughout history have collapsed, not because their ideology failed, but because they ran out of money. Rallies cost money. Newspapers cost money. Paying organizers and speakers and security costs money. The SA, the brown shirts, the paramilitary wing of the party, cost enormous amounts of money to equip and maintain. Without a functioning financial infrastructure, the Nazi Party would have been just another failed radical movement in the graveyard of Weimar Republic politics. Schwarz built that infrastructure. He made the machine work, and the machine delivered Hitler to power. January 30th, 1933. Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany. The Nazi Party, which 8 years earlier had been a broke, disorganized fringe movement, is now the government of one of the most powerful nations in Europe. For most senior Nazis, this moment meant a rush for political power, for government ministries, for the visible symbols of authority. Schwarz showed no interest in any of that. He stayed in his office in Munich. He kept doing what he had always done, managing the party finances, keeping the books, making sure the money flowed where it needed to flow. His reward came in a different form. In 1933, he was made an SS Obergruppenführer, one of the highest ranks in the SS, equivalent to a full general. He was given honorary positions and titles, but more importantly, he was given resources. Because now the Nazi Party wasn't a struggling political movement scraping together membership dues. It was the government, and the resources of the German state were available to support it. What Schwarz built in the years between 1933 and 1945 was something genuinely unprecedented. The Nazi Party's financial operations became intertwined with the German state in ways that were deliberately complex and difficult to untangle. Party funds and state funds flowed together. The distinction between Nazi Party property and German national property blurred deliberately. Schwarz understood and exploited this blurring with sophisticated precision. The party collected dues from millions of members. It received contributions from businesses that understood the political benefits of generosity toward the ruling party. It received funds from the state. It managed enormous property holdings, buildings, vehicles, equipment accumulated over years of expansion. and it spent on a scale that matched its ambitions. Every Nazi rally, and these were not small events, these were massive theatrical productions involving hundreds of thousands of people, requiring enormous logistical operations, was funded through Schwarz's office. Every Nazi newspaper and propaganda publication, the entire administrative apparatus of the party that ran parallel to the German state. The SS itself, which grew from a small personal bodyguard into a massive military and police organization with its own economic empire. And the war. The SS's role in the war, the Waffen-SS divisions that fought on every front, the concentration camp system, the machinery of the final solution. All of it had financial dimensions. All of it required money, logistics, administration, and Schwarz was at the center of the financial web that made it possible. Here's the thing about Franz Xaver Schwarz that makes him genuinely disturbing to think about. He wasn't an ideological fanatic in the way that Himmler was a fanatic, or Goebbels was a fanatic. He wasn't driven by a burning hatred or a messianic vision of racial purity. He was, by all accounts, a bureaucrat, a financial professional who applied his skills to whatever organization he was working for with the same methodical efficiency he had brought to Munich city administration decades earlier. He knew what the money was being used for. He knew about the concentration camps. He knew about the mass executions. He knew about the death camps in Poland. The financial operations of the SS ran through his awareness, not always directly, because Himmler's organization had its own financial structures, but Schwarz understood the broader picture. He was a senior figure at the very top of the Nazi hierarchy for 20 years. There was no plausible ignorance available to him, and he kept the books. He kept making sure the accounts balanced. He kept the machine funded and running. That is what makes the quiet men more frightening than the fanatics in some ways. Himmler believed. Goebbels believed. Their crimes came wrapped in ideology, in a kind of terrible conviction that what they were doing was necessary and correct. Schwarz apparently just did his job. The Holocaust was a line item. The war was an expense to be managed. The deaths of millions were, from his perspective in that Munich office, simply costs to be accounted for. As Germany collapsed in 1944 and 1945, Schwarz faced a problem that any good treasurer would recognize immediately. The assets needed to be protected. The records needed to be managed. 20 years of financial documentation, the complete paper trail of Nazi party finances, the records of donations, expenditures, property holdings, relationships with German industry, all of it was sitting in files that the approaching Allied armies would eventually find. Some records were destroyed. What exactly was preserved and what was burned in the final chaos of the Reich's collapse is something historians are still working through. What we know is that Schwarz himself did not escape. He was captured by American forces in 1945. His post-war fate was, in some ways, as quiet as his wartime role. He was classified as a major offender by the denazification tribunals, which was the highest category, reserved for the most senior and culpable figures of the regime. He was sentenced to prison and had his assets confiscated, but he never faced the full weight of a major war crimes trial. He was old, nearly 70 when the war ended. His health deteriorated in custody. Franz Xaver Schwarz died on December 2nd, 1947, in an internment camp in Regensburg. He was 72 years old. He died before any serious legal reckoning with his specific role could be completed. History barely noticed, which is, in a way, the most Franz Xaver Schwarz ending imaginable. The reason to remember Franz Xaver Schwarz is not because he was the most evil man in the Third Reich. He wasn't. He didn't design the death camps or order the mass executions or build the ideology that justified it all. The reason to remember him is because of what he represents. Every atrocity in history has people like Schwarz behind it. The people who don't pull triggers, but make sure the organization that pulls triggers is properly funded and administered. The people who apply professional competence to monstrous ends without ever engaging with the monstrousness directly. The people who keep the machine running while telling themselves, if they tell themselves anything at all, that they're just doing their job. The Holocaust required believers. It required fanatics. It required men like Himmler and Heydrich, who were driven by ideology to build the machinery of mass murder. But it also required the machine to be funded. It required the accounts to balance. It required someone to make sure that when the SS needed money, it had money, that when the party needed resources, they were available, that the financial infrastructure supporting 20 years of Nazi rule was solid and functional and impossible to collapse. That was Franz Xaver Schwarz, the man nobody remembers, the man without whom none of it was possible. He wrote the check for all of it.